We are live.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Social Services Committee meeting for Wednesday, February 5th. And clerk, has the roll been taken?
Through the chair, roll has been taken.
At this time, I'll ask if there are any conflicts of interest from any of the members. Seeing none, I'll now call for separations, noting that at this time, I'll ask for separations. If there are any committee members who wish to separate for discussion purposes, the following item will be automatically separated as there is a delegation, and that'll be 6.1.1. Are there any other separations? Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Madam Chair. 5.1 and 5.2. Questions on both.
Okay, thank you. And anything else from the committee? Councillor Bell?
6.2, please.
All right, and I think that's mostly everything, but is there anything else anybody would like separated? All right. And from there, we'll move along. Can I get a mover and a seconder to place all items that for consideration and consent on the floor that all items for consideration and consent that have not been separated, be approved. Mayor Bailey and Councillor Sikoli. And we'll call the vote on those.
All those in favor? That carries. Thank you.
All right, so today we have one delegation. So prior to hearing the delegations, I would like to remind those in the meeting today of the following rules of decorum as set forth in the city's procedural bylaw. No person shall display any sign, banner, or placard in the meeting room other than materials that, in the opinion of the chair, are legitimate audio and visual aids necessary in connection with any presentation to be made to council. All persons present shall use polite and respectful language and shall refrain from the use of any language or making any gesture that is disrespectful or offensive. All persons addressing council shall speak only to the subject in debate and shall not speak on any other subject, and no person shall applaud participants in debate or engage in conversation or behavior that may be disruptive to the proceedings. At this time, I'd like to welcome Ian Aiken to come forward and speak to item 4.1.1. Just as a reminder, you'll have 10 minutes inclusive of questions.
Good morning, Mayor Bailey, councillors. Thank you very much for the opportunity of speaking today, specifically about the AMO report that I understand is in front of you. My name's Ian Aiken. I'm the executive director of the Brent Holloman Norfolk Legal Clinic. I'm here with one of my staff, Aisha Noorani, and two board members, Stephanie Deering and Leslie Crawford. We'd like to provide our perspective and our recommendations to this committee with respect to the AMO report. To get to the end, though, we're urging council and this committee to support the recommendations in the report. But we felt it was important that we bring the perspective that we have based on years and years of working with tenants, the homeless and the marginalized. I'd like to start with, and this is something that we've seen that I know may be evident, but I quote Tim Richter. He's the president of the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. I understand he was involved on part of the group that worked on the AMO report. He said publicly that past research has shown that 80 to 85% of people who become homeless, it's for almost purely economic reasons. They just can't afford the rent. And of course, there are people, many people who have more complex needs, but the correct narrative and what we have seen at our clinic and in our community, certainly over the last 5 years, is that the vast majority of tenants that we're working with and trying to save their tenancies lose their tenancies because of their inability to pay the rent. And we've assisted literally in the last 5 years, hundreds of tenants, many evicted for that very reason. There's been a huge increase in own use and renoviction applications that I'm sure we're all aware of. But the really incredible and devastating thing that we've seen is that so many people, including seniors, longstanding good tenants, we've had tenants that have lived in an apartment for 10, 15, even 20 years. But over the last 5 years, they've been pushed out. And then once evicted, of course, they either become homeless. The secondary thing that we've seen is that some people are able to move into either less stable or more expensive housing, but then they get caught up in we're paying more rent. They get caught up in this this vortex that eventually leads to homelessness. And the impact on your constituents and our community is quite honestly beyond devastating. There's lots and lots of stories that we could present to you, but what we've seen, and we see some of these statistics in the AMO report. We see 25% of the chronically homeless are children or youth. I despair. This is another cohort that we're going to lose to poverty and hopelessness. They're not going to or may not be able to recover enough in the long term to work, to attend school, to care for children, or contribute to community safety. We see the safety net, and we know this is simply not designed and is often not available to our clients who are homeless because of any number of reasons: lack of trust, their families don't have the resources to help, lack of ID, theft, abuse. We see more and more families that have been evicted and torn apart, even sometimes when a parent or parents are working. And this is something, quite honestly, that has been a real change. We didn't see this level of families being evicted into homelessness 6-7 years ago. There's, we have, again, the stories are legion, but we have clients and women in particular who are subject to exploitation and violence while they're homeless. We've seen deaths, we lose our clients to death and illness on a too regular basis. Now, that said, just as government policy in our perspective, from our perspective, has contributed to the problem, we know that there are solutions available if the will is there. And the AMO report, in our view, is a very good roadmap. It's evidence-based, it's comprehensive, it recommends achievable solutions, and as I said earlier, we support its recommendations. And we also know that it costs less to house somebody than it is to have them stay in a shelter, hospital, or jail. And we also understand at the municipal level that the province continues to download responsibilities to municipality and yet not properly fund housing. And we know that municipalities don't have the resources to solve the problem alone. We see this as an abdication of the province's responsibility, but when we look to the AMO report, we see a good representation of the issue. And as I said, a roadmap to move forward with not only money, but the tools that are necessary to deal with or help to alleviate the homeless issue in this community and in surrounding communities. So we're requesting that this committee make the following recommendations to council. Flowing from the AMO report, request the provincial funding in the amount of 11 billion over the next 10 years and if I understand it properly, 2.1 billion immediately in the short term. The 11 billion needs to fund RGI, transitional, supportive housing, and affordable housing. And we've also always advocated and continue to advocate that affordable housing should be defined as rent of 30% of income. In the interim, the 2.1 billion that's noted in the AMO report would enable this community to quickly stabilize and move people from encampments into new housing and supportive spaces. Was it yesterday or the day before? We saw news in the local media that Brantford has received, I think, its portion of 75 million from the province, of about $865,000 from the province for affordable housing and emergency shelter beds. So that's great news. But the difficulty, and I don't have to explain it to council, but the difficulty is this comes from a total of 75 million from the province, and it's just clearly not enough. I would suggest it may be illustrative of the provincial government's current priorities. 75 million for the homeless is simply not enough, considering the AMO report very clearly says that if municipalities are going to be able to tackle this problem in the immediate and the near term, municipalities need $2 billion, not 75 million. But again, the good news is, and I see from the reporting that that money, and it's a significant amount of money, is going to be used for affordable housing and additional emergency shelter beds. With respect to the shelter, our request strongly urge that the shelter is needed now. And the shelter beds, the emergency shelters that are additional beds, have to be low barrier and safe to meet the actual need. We know from research that for people to access shelter beds, they have to be low barrier and safe. We also urge council to request additional and adequate funding for rent supplements, for example, through COB benefits, to ensure those tenants at risk of eviction to maintain their tenancy or find alternative housing. We have, on the ground, we have seen tenants being pushed out or have been pushed out of their long-term housing. And if they have access to rent supplements, whether it be COB or others, then there are ways, and we can assist them in finding safe, affordable with supplement housing. That's crucial. And although it would take money, it's an immediate tool that the community and that we and tenants can use. Request immediate funding for addiction treatment facilities. And having looked at the AMO report and—
Sorry to interrupt, but at this time, it's been 10 minutes. And
Indeed.
so I'll have to thank you for your presentation,
Very good.
and we'll deal with this item shortly. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
At this time, the committee will now consider items that have been separated for discussion purposes. Could I get a mover and a seconder to place all items separated on the floor for discussion purposes? Councillor Sicoli and Councillor McCurry, thank you. So since there was a delegation, we're going to start with item 6.1. Any discussion? Councillor McCurry, go ahead.
I thought that might confuse you. I missed the opening face-off of the delegation. Could staff remind me if Mr. Aitken mentioned what his definition of low barrier was?
Through the chair, good morning, Mary Mustin, Senior Director of Community Services and Social Development. No, I did not hear Mr. Aiken explain what low barrier is. However, in the sheltering system, we look at low barrier as any shelter that allows people who are experiencing difficulties with addictions and mental health concerns to still access the shelter, and really making sure that they are supported in a way that meets their needs the best.
So guns, knives, drugs are okay and low barrier access?
From the literature, that they recommend that shelter providers do have a system in place so that people who are experiencing homelessness can access the shelter and still maintain their possessions, but keep the shelter residents and staff safe.
He also mentioned the word safe. So one would presume then that they would have perhaps a locker to store their things that are harmful to others, wouldn't be permitted within the shelter? Is that how that would function?
Through the chair, yes, most shelter systems do have a storage setup that is safe and secure so that people who are accessing the shelter can only access their items upon arrival or departure.
Thank you for that.
Councillor Sakoli, go ahead, please.
Yes, a few questions and comments here. First and foremost, I want to thank you for putting this together and bringing it forward for us. It's really great to have updated information brought to us. We do get these reports periodically, and it's just really great for us to have this. And I do appreciate the 2-page summary for our reading pleasure here. But I do have some questions, and I wish I had a chance to ask this of our delegation, because he seems to have some background information on this. But I understand that, right or wrong, the municipalities are carrying a disproportionate share of the burden of, I'll call it a burden, it's a financial burden to provide housing and emergency shelters. And I'm curious perhaps of staff, because I do really think that we need an exit strategy. We can provide the emergency shelter. We seem to be able to transition to an affordable housing unit, but then we really have zero strategy for transitioning an individual out of that system and into market rent units, because it just snowballs, right? We will eventually run out of units. More and more people are finding housing unaffordable. And I know I've brought this up before, Mary, but have we ever asked for staff direction to research maybe what other municipalities are doing as far as an exit strategy?
Through the chair, thank you for the question. We do actually work and collaborate with other municipalities on our various networks, so such as the OMSA network, where we share best practices. And I can confidently say that this is a struggle in all municipalities, because there is a significant lack of transitional housing and a significant lack of supportive housing. The folks that are accessing emergency shelters have much more acuity, so higher needs than they have even 5 years ago. So successfully exiting the emergency sheltering system and then maintaining stable housing, they need wraparound supports. And there is a significant deficit in wraparound supports.
And would that be a product that is offered by the municipality, or would that be something that perhaps the province would step into to assist those individuals with?
So through the chair, this is where homelessness becomes very complex, because these are multiple systems that need to work together. So this could be the healthcare system, the justice system, the education system. And for people who need wraparound supports, it's unique to their needs. So someone might need assistance with accessing medical appointments. And once someone's health deteriorates, they can be at risk of homelessness yet again.
Fair. So thank you very much. And I know that there are some individuals, and I'm not able to talk directly to them, but I hope you will take this back with you and look for strategies and do some research on how we can transition effectively individuals out of the system and into, for lack of a better term, I'm going to call it the real world, whether that be providing education and moving people through the system and out, so that we can turn over units and give them to new individuals who require that assistance. I think here at the City of Brantford and Brant County, we do really well, and we've made major millions and millions of dollars of investment in affordable housing, and we're doing really well above and beyond a lot of other municipalities, but it's just, we're being buried, we're treading water, we're keeping our head above, barely keeping it above, and we're having some impacts to our centralized housing list, but it's not enough. And until we really get to the core of the issue, this is all Band-Aid fixes, and we're doing our best, but we do need some other assistance, and I think the exit strategy is it. Now, the next thing that I'm going to comment on is I've noticed that we have an increase.
Councillor Secoli, sorry to interrupt, but would you like to be added to a second speaking opportunity? Thank you. All right, and with that, we'll go to Councillor Carpenter and then to Councillor Oakley, please.
Thank you, Chair Samuel. Mary, in this report, are we going to be, from this report, are there going to become recommendations for resolutions for members of council so the councils can have a debate on the issues and the recommendations in the report?
Through the chair, so this is a consent item just to receive the report. The AMO report was actually funded by the Association of Municipalities of Ontario. It's the first of its kind. So the consultant that was retained was Help Seeker Technologies, and they did a very deep investment into reviewing all the information from all 47 service managers across the province. I can share that housing and homelessness staff here spent quite a few weeks compiling the information to provide data for this report. And this report is a very comprehensive document. Locally, what staff are going to be doing is reviewing the report, and as a part of reviewing all of the master plans that Housing and Homelessness Services currently has. So the Brantford Brant Housing Stability Plan, the Brantford Brant Municipal Housing Plan, and we will look at these recommendations and start imparting them into the next round of master plans that we will bring back to Social Services Committee for endorsement.
Thank you, Mary. And further to that, the speaker, Ian Aitken, I think was his name. Could I make sure I get his contact? I'd like to speak to him about some other issues. And he mentioned the rental evictions and a number of things, but what he hasn't mentioned is condo conversions. So rental units converted to condo, which put those people in those rental units might make them homeless. We were looking at that. Is there any more approach to preventing condo conversion that makes people homeless?
Through the chair, I would have to take that back. That is a very good question for our planning department.
Yeah, I think we have an issue coming forward next week, actually, that's a condo conversion from large rental properties that have been rental property for many, many years that will then become condo conversion if passed by council, by planning committee, and then those people could very well be homeless in the future as those units are sold off. And I don't know what our policy is for then us having to provide homes for people because of the condo conversion. Thank you.
Councillor Oakley, go ahead, please.
Thank you, through the chair. Just a couple of comments. So I really enjoyed the presentation from the delegation. And I 100% agree with both their statements here and what the report states, which is the funding that and regime that the provincial government over the years, I don't want to just blame the former sitting government, but over the past 30 years with the frequent downloading, the supports are fractional to the need. I mean, I'm reading right here, you know, the report further states that the recent provincial investments in homelessness are appreciated but inadequate. It's $75.5 million for the whole province to invest in affordable housing. The County of Brantford and City of Brantford's plan to build, I believe, another 300 units over the next 5 years totals $85 million alone. Even if we got the full allotment, it still wouldn't tackle that need. So it's fractional. It's not even in the right ballpark of the amount of funding that's needed. So I think this is really a key issue that the provincial government and federal government have to step up on, as they've been frequently downloading these costs onto the municipalities. I was just at Roma, and there was a report from Roma showing that in the province of Ontario, we have the second highest property taxes in the entire country, and that's largely as a product of how many services the provincial government over the past 30 years have downloaded onto municipalities. So either some form of uploading needs to happen, or a more consistent stream of funding needs to come to us, and not these grants where we're competing cutthroat against other municipalities for money that won't even start to cover the issue. So we have to plead to whatever provincial government is going to be sitting and on February 28th, that this has to be addressed. And it's to the point where AMO for the first time ever is running an election campaign on these issues because the problem has gotten so extreme in terms of our fundraising, what we're asked to do and the funding sources that we have. So something needs to change.
Go ahead, Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just the AMO report and the delegation, there's some really interesting data, scary data. For example, how quick the numbers have grown recently. And I know we're at social services, but I think all of us around the table need to be cognizant of other roles we play in our community because we talk about, if you look at everything from a demand supply side, the demand for affordable housing, the demand for more housing for the homelessness, it just keeps growing and growing, and we forget, well, where did all the supply come from? What's causing that problem? So just I think we should all. There's only so much we can do because a lot of it is beyond the control of municipalities. It's macro. It could be leftovers from COVID. It could be massive numbers coming to the country. Could be the carbon tax, lowering our economic output, whatever it is. But I think, like I say, just keep in mind your other roles and whatever we can do to cut red tape, to create jobs through the Chamber of Commerce, through our business economic development. I think that's something we should all keep in mind because, like I say, we're focused and we should be around social services on meeting that demand, but we should always be cognizant of, well, why is there so many people looking for affordable housing? And as the delegation said today, and I was kind of surprised by that, 80 to 85% become homeless because of an inability to pay the rent. So quite an eye-opener statement. Yeah, leave it at that, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other first-time speakers? Councillor Bell, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ian, for speaking. As some other delegates or some other members of this committee, like me, were at Roma a little while ago, we heard this story in a little bit more of a fulsome way. I'm pleased that our team have been inputters, and I hope that it's implicit that given that we've been inputters to this report, we were actually supportive of the recommendations of the report. And I thought Councillor Carpenter was going along the lines of, does this committee need to bring forward a resolution of support to the recommendations in the AMO report? And we kind of drifted away from that, so I don't know whether that's what his intentions were. But if nobody else will make that motion, I will make the motion that this committee fully supports the recommendations of the AMO report and that is brought forward to our respective councils for their support and onwards to the Minister. Just a last word on the experience at Roma. The issue of downloading of costs was highlighted. There was a very good presentation by a member of the Roma or the AMO staff. The question was asked directly of the Minister for Municipal Affairs, would he change the funding arrangement? And he just passed it by. And I have no confidence that there is going to be a change in that relationship unless we, all 444 municipalities, really step up and get right behind AMO on this and forward a direct plea to, or demand effectively to government that this arrangement is changed, because as Councillor Oakley pointed out, what they've offered so far won't even meet the needs of 2 out of the 444 municipalities on this issue. So if at the right time, Madam Chair, you need me to make the motion, I will do so.
Councillor Bell, if you wanted to make an amendment, you could go ahead and do that, and I need to know who your seconder would be.
Yeah, I just need to check on what the actual recommendation is. A consent item at the moment. So my recommendation will be to accept the report for information, but also then to offer support from our two councils, full support from our two councils to the recommendations of this AMO report.
Okay, and I've seen Councillor Carpenter's hand as seconding that. Any discussion on the amendment on the floor? Councillor McCurry and then Councillor Secoli.
Wonder if staff could speak to what this commits both municipalities to if it's adopted here and then by both councils. Sorry about that. I guess I wasn't close enough to the microphone. Could you advise us this morning of what this would commit this committee, both councils to, both in terms of finance and participation in the recommendations?
Yes, through the chair, it wouldn't commit the municipalities to anything through it. It would just be accepting the recommendations. And staff would make sure that we are looking at this AMO report as a guiding document as we move forward in planning for services.
So does AMO provide us with any funding?
Unfortunately, no,
But the provincial government does.
that is correct.
So in the case of a conflict between AMO and the provincial government, which this seems to represent at the current time, provided that the outcome on February 28th is a favorable one, does this have any significance whatsoever for us to endorse this?
Through the chair, I think the intent is to express the support of the principle of additional provincial funding towards municipalities for the various forms of housing that are identified in the report as lacking, the capacity issues that are lacking in the current system. So I think that's what the intent, our understanding is that's what the intent of the amendment would be.
So the intent then would be to say, please give us more money.
That would be my understanding.
And I'm happy to support that.
Councillor Secoli, go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you. And just looking for clarity and perhaps we can just fine tune this amendment, but who are we sending a letter to someone? Is this going back to our respective councils from social services with a show of support from this committee? Like who specifically are we aiming at here?
Through the chair, it would go to the respective councils, but a letter of support could be forwarded both to the provincial MPP once the election has passed and to the federal MP's office.
Okay, so perhaps some clarity in the amendment that the show of support from social services committee to our respective councils is what we're looking to do. And then our councils can decide whether or not we want to send letters to the provincial government or not. I would like that to be a decision of each individual council. And so I'm not sure governance perspective, how we, massage this into being what I just said, but
I'm going to go back to Councillor Bell because I haven't given him the opportunity to speak to this, and I'm sure that he can supply more clarity on what he was proposing. Thank you.
So I think it's a stepwise process. Clearly, we can't, as a committee, send anything out, but we can recommend it to our respective councils. But from the council, it should go to the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing. He's on the line on this one. And we should then copy his boss, and we should copy our local MPPs, because there are, remember, 3 of them. We actually had a delegation at Roma where we actually had all 3 MPPs in the same room at the same time, which is quite remarkable.
Okay, so I'm going to go to Councillor Carpenter.
Yes, I was happy to second Councillor Bell's amendment. Really, it's exactly as Councillor Secoli just said. It is to go to our specific councillors, each council, to decide how we want to do this. But accepting the recommendation, the report is clear. It says that Ontario is the only province in the country where it downloads the responsibilities to municipalities and it doesn't fund it. It's also, as I understand, the only government in Canada that hasn't given any funding increase to social services since they were elected in 2019. So when we talk about the report saying that 85% of the people is because they can't afford to pay their rent, there hasn't been any social increase in funding for 6 years, for crying out loud. Uh, So, the recommendation says there needs to be more funding for the provincial government. They need to take responsibility for their actions. We don't need to worry about beer in the corner stores or not paying for license plates. We need to take care of the poor. And this government seems to have being allergic to helping or thinking about the poor, or those trying to
On the
make.
amendment, Madam Chair?
So I
Councillor
support this
Carpenter,
amendment heartily. So let's just move the amendment forward properly, like we should be doing, and get this done with, and the councils can debate it at the local council level. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, with that, if there aren't any other speakers to the amendment, then we'll call the question on the amendment.
All those in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you.
Thank you, and now the main motion as amended.
Was that a motion carried unanimously? I couldn't tell.
Yes, it was. Thank you. Okay, so before I move on to, are there any first-time speakers to the motion as amended before I move on to second-time speakers? No. My apologies. Any discussion? Councillor McCurry, go ahead.
Madam Chair, thank you. First of all, I want to correct something that was said earlier by a member of this committee. There is an application coming to Planning Committee on the 13th of February for a condominium conversion of an apartment building on Melrose Place. What was asserted by the councillor is completely unfounded, that anybody will lose their homes as a result of that. The report, I believe, will make clear that circumstance. So I just want to make sure that people in the community aren't terrified by something we say here, which is not based in fact. So, I think when you look at the causes of homelessness, it has two streams. First of all, you got folks who can't afford to pay their rent because everything else is too damned expensive. And secondly, you got folks who experience mental health issues, who find it tough to stay in their premises. And that may be an oversimplification, but, levels of government do nothing to address either of those. Both levels of government just continue to pile on the rabbit with respect to increased costs to pay for programs that we run in other countries. Here in the city of Brantford, we have a deficit of housing, and yet we've had an increase, I believe, in student population here in the city of Brantford in the last year of about 1,600 people. That adds pressure, right? And I don't see the universities building any housing to relieve the pressures on us. And it was said earlier by a number of people, gravity rolls downhill, and we seem to be in the valley when it comes to federal and provincial government spending. They spend money on kooky stuff, and here we are, we have to pick up the pieces. And we see the results of it on our city streets with a lack of socialization and that the whole thing that goes on with people being down and out here in the city of Brantford and elsewhere. And I didn't intend to launch into a political debate about this during an election campaign. Far be it for me to campaign for, one party or the other. None of us here would do that. But there's got to be a day of reckoning for both these senior levels of government. It can't be dumped at all on the taxpayers of the city of Brantford. It's a pretty skinny chicken for us as it is. We had what do we have this year? 5.7% increase. Lord knows what it's going to be next year. There's one community, I think, somewhere in Ontario, they're having an increase of 50% spread over 3 or 4 years. It's got to stop. We've got to quit spending money on stupid things to satisfy the whims of small interest groups in this country, in this province, and the city. Thank you.
Councillor Sakoli, go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you. Question for staff. It was referred to earlier, is it a no barrier shelter or low barrier shelter?
Through the chair, low barrier.
Low barrier shelter. Have we had one of those in the city before?
Through the chair. So our coordinated access system is working towards low barrier shelters. However, each shelter does have its own specific concerns and along with staffing, safety, the way the shelters are set up. So shelter operators are very mindful and they try to accommodate everyone within their needs. However, there are limitations, as the committee has mentioned, that a lot of people experiencing homelessness do have weapons on themselves. They do have illicit substances. So each shelter provider has to balance the safety of their staff along with admitting that residents into their shelter system.
So sorry, our shelters are already somewhat low barrier.
So through the chair, yes, some of them are low barrier. The varying degrees of low barrier does shift because certain shelters might also have larger systems that they have to work with. So like the Salvation Army Brantford Booth Center, they do their best, but they also are governed by an international organization. So they do have policies and processes to adhere to.
So I think I'm learning here, there's a low barrier and then there's a no barrier, and I think I was finding some confusion between the two. My next question is regarding just something that I saw in this report, and it stated that there was an increase since 2016, an increase of 150% homelessness in rural areas. So my question is, and this just comes from not knowing, are there shelters or emergency shelters in the county, and where are they located?
Through the chair, no, there are no emergency shelters in the county of Brant right now. Really, for best practices, we do have the sheltering system within the city limits because it's easier for people experiencing homelessness to access services. We do have it set up that if anyone in the county is in need of emergency sheltering services, they connect with SOAR Community Services and they will arrange for transportation to one of the emergency shelters.
So if someone finds themselves homeless in a rural community, they get shipped into Brantford?
Through the chair, only if they're in the county of Brant.
Okay. Is there any value to exploring providing that type of service somewhere in the county?
Through the chair, we are undergoing a consultant's review of the coordinated access system. So they have been requested to review and provide an opinion on whether or not an emergency shelter would be required in the county.
So we're already researching this and that will come back to this committee at some point?
That is correct.
Good to know. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Are there any other first-time speakers? Councillor Oakley, go ahead.
Through the chair. So first I want to say that I'm going to recommend, or I'm going to support the recommendation, amended recommendation. As I said previously, we're in desperate need of more funding and a fundamental shakeup in how this type of housing is funded. And just to comment on Councillor Sokoli's query there, this is actually part of the topic of conversation of the delegation that Councillor Bell mentioned earlier that we had at Roma. And that was actually something that we discussed with the ministry, where they were curious if we were looking into that, and that might be a good idea. So I do think that is something that is worth looking into, especially as in particular my area of Paris is growing. It will be something that at least I would say likely in the next 10 years, something that needs to be addressed. So very likely I think that will need to happen.
Thank you. Any other first-time speakers? Okay, with that, I'll take the Councillor Carpenter, go ahead, please.
Sorry, Councillor Samuel, just to Mary, the shelter that is provided in the city is funded by both the city and the city of the county of Brant too.
Through the chair, yes, that is correct.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That's it for me.
Okay, so I'm going to ask this question again. Are there any other first-time speakers? All right, so I'm going to take this opportunity then to ask a couple of questions that I have. So first, I wanted to ask staff, with the AMO report, what recommendation do they make in regards to shelters? And my second question you can follow up with is, what is the current winter response that we have?
Thank you. Through the chair, The recommendations in the AMO report is really looking at moving away from emergency sheltering and really investing heavily in transitional housing and supportive housing and the operational needs for those types of buildings, which is the wraparound supports. So that is having staff who work very closely with people who have moved from an emergency shelter into the transitional or supportive housing model so they can actually maintain their tenancy. Ideally, and we are doing this locally now, diversion is the very first step when someone contacts the emergency shelter system, and reconnecting them with safe supports is the ideal. Oftentimes people are homeless because they have a lack of social supports. And so we do try and divert them back to family, friends who are safe. Once a person is in the emergency sheltering system, unfortunately, institutionalization can happen very quickly. And the longer they are in an emergency shelter, the harder it will be to transition successfully to permanent housing. Now, with respect to your second question for winter sheltering response, I'm happy to share that we have been able to increase shelter spaces over the winter months. So from December 1st until April 1st of this year. And with the winter sheltering response, as soon as a cold alert is declared, no one is refused shelter. So what that means is that even people who have restrictions, so people can be restricted from shelters if they've displayed violent behaviors, if they have repeatedly failed to follow the rules, those restrictions are lifted, and the SOAR Community Services will appropriately place anyone into the emergency sheltering system during a cold alert.
Thank you. So really, the report is having us move a little further away from the shelter system and looking at other areas of the continuum. So I'm glad to see that. I also just wanted to mention, and I know that it's been mentioned already this today, but I think it's worth noting again that the province of Ontario is the only municipality where the responsibility for social housing has been downloaded onto the municipalities. And often we're negatively impacted when it comes to accessing grant funding because flowing from the federal government, because it has to flow through the province. So I think that it's time that our other levels of government really start to work with us on that and ensure that the municipalities are getting the support that they need. Thank you. And at this time, Councillor Oakley, second time speaker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And let me know if I'm going too far off the topic here. But your comment on winter sheltering reminded me, as well as I had a couple conversations over the past couple of months with a few of the nonprofits and services that we're working with to provide some of these services like our winter sheltering. And, you know, the comments that I heard from them is actually very reminiscent of this quote that I'm reading here in the report, which is provincial investments are appreciated but inadequate. And I think many of them are feeling in the same way with our own contributions. So it's a vicious cycle where I think we are inadequately funding those services for what we're asking them to do. And that's a product of the province underfunding us and so on and so forth. And as Councillor McCurry said, the buck does ultimately stop with us as we're at the bottom of the valley, but it's I hope we can find a way through with hopefully the provincial government stepping up to fund us properly, that then we can fund those nonprofits properly as well, so they're not feeling left out in the dark to try to provide the services we're asking them to provide.
Thank you. Any further speakers on this motion? All right, with that, I'm going to call the question.
All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you.
So now we'll move on to item 5.1. Councillor Miller, I think you asked for that to be separated.
I did, Madam Chair. Thank you. Just I'm gonna rapid fire a few questions here. So the Housing Stability Worker Pilot Program, we're looking at an upset limit of $525,000. This program was funded from the federal Reaching Home program. Now we're looking at it to be funded from the Housing Provider Stability Reserve. I just wondered how much is in that reserve currently? First question.
Through the chair, I would have to go back and bring that information back, but at last check, it was close to $1 million currently.
Okay, so is this money going to be used for 4 workers? Do we know how many we're hiring?
Through the chair, yes, there's currently 4 people who are in the housing stability worker role. So we wouldn't be hiring new people. We would be extending their contracts for another year.
Okay, and then long-term, any thoughts to long-term funding past this year?
Through the chair, that is going to be the next step, is looking at how we can sustain these much needed positions. So that is going to be work that staff are going to be taking back and completing over the next 12 months.
Okay, and then you did, I thought the report did a good job of explaining why these would be good positions to keep. There's payback for every dollar invested here. It's one less person put out on the street with all the associated problems with that. But using the money from the Housing Provider Stability Reserve, so we're funding one thing, but at the end of the day, something's not being funded, right? So what would that money have been used for if it wouldn't be used for this, for these workers?
So through the chair, that reserve is for the service manager. So the city of Brantford as a service manager to utilize to assist housing providers with their needs. So we were looking at having that reserve open. So if a housing provider is experiencing difficulties in completing a capital repair, luckily we've been successful with receiving COCHI and OPI funding, and we have been able to offset capital costs for housing providers in this last fiscal year. So right now we have not used money from the social housing provider reserve that would negatively be impacting the housing providers.
Okay, thank you for the answers.
Councillor Sluss, do you still have a question, or did theirs? get
No,
answered?
Councillor Miller actually hit the two that I was asking. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. I just wanted to check. Councillor McCurry, go ahead.
Chair, thank you through you to staff. Mary, the report speaks about initiatives and objectives. Would it be possible for you to provide us with a list of those? Not necessarily now, please.
Sure, no problem.
And this is called, the funding is a Reaching Home grant from the Liberal government. Is that correct?
Yes, this program was funded by the Reaching Home federal government funding.
Do all communities get that?
Through the chair, no, for Reaching Home grant funding, it's goes to community entities. So the city of Brantford is the community entity for Reaching Home locally. And there are various streams. So there's an Indigenous stream as well, which this Brantford does get Indigenous stream funding. However, it does not come to the city because we are not the community entity. Depending on each community, some communities have designated nonprofit providers to be their Reaching Home community entity. So in those cases, funding would flow to those organizations.
But would it be safe to say that this money reaches every community in Canada that needs it?
Through the chair, I'm not quite sure. I would have to review all the community entities in the
And so it doesn't have to be member held like some of the federal initiatives.
Yeah, can you repeat that, please?
It's okay. It was just a rhetorical question. So we're spending this money just with respect to people that are our tenants, city, county building tenants.
Through the chair, yes. Right now, we are focusing very strongly in trying to maintain tenancies in all of the rent gear to income units in the city and county.
So with respect to RGIs, are some of those folks ODSP and OW clients?
Absolutely.
We had a discussion a number of times over the last 2 decades about having our tenants in our buildings and elsewhere for that matter be required to direct pay from their ODSP or OW to secure their housing. And the argument has consistently been that it's an affront to the dignity of folks like that. And I don't disagree with that, but I would say that being homeless is more of an affront to dignity. Is there an opportunity for you to take a look at creating a more robust program around direct pay?
Through the chair, I can actually confidently say that when a housing stability worker is engaged with a household on social assistance, that is one of the avenues they strongly explore so that they can maintain their tenancy. We want to ensure that their rent is paid on time. So whenever families are open to it, then they will enter into a pay direct agreement.
So can I infer from that that if someone becomes in arrears, that we suggest that they do that?
Through the chair, yes, that is one of the reasons that we would suggest that. And the housing stability workers also assist in finding an appropriate repayment amount for even people on social assistance so that while they would struggle, they could still make their repayments and not be homeless.
Yeah. It says that since the program's inception, it has evolved. Could you just broadly describe that mission creep?
Yes, so through the chair, when the program first started in 2023, the housing stability workers were working closely with people who were already housed. Now we have expanded the program to support people newly leaving the emergency sheltering system into their housing. So those folks are onboarded to the HSW program as soon as possible because we want to make sure that they are successful in their tenancies and acknowledge that they might have some struggles.
No, we don't know the amount of the balance in the Housing Provider Stability Reserve RF 0476, but do we know what might suffer as a result of using those funds for this program?
Through the chair, right now, nothing would suffer if we use those funds.
So it's just a reserve.
It's correct. Right now, it's a reserve.
And what was it intended for?
It was for housing providers.
Councilor Curry, you're actually at your time. Would you like to have a second speaking opportunity?
Yes, please.
Any additional speakers? Go ahead, Councilor Bell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to staff. Ian, when he spoke, said that it costs less to deal with housing than it does with homelessness. Do we have any data that would help us understand that, the dimensions of that?
Through the chair, yes, absolutely. Just to give an example, rent geared to income housing is 30% of the household's income. So for a person on ODSP or Ontario Works, you're looking at a rent of approximately $150 a month. Once that household becomes homeless, there are quite a significant costs incurred, which start at sheltering someone in an emergency shelter or motel, which can be anywhere from $80 a day to $120 a day. And most people will not leave the emergency sheltering system within a month. So we're looking at spending quite a few thousands of dollars keeping them in an emergency shelter. Locally, we would also incur the costs of now turning over that unit and making it ready for the next tenant and bringing a new tenancy into that unit.
Thank you for that, Mary. I think it does then indicate the value of the service that you're now proposing that we fund for another year. I'm fully supportive of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other first-time speakers? So with that, I'm going to ask a question. So Councillor Bell has actually asked one of my questions already, which was about the savings or the costs that are incurred with someone losing their tenancy. But I also wanted to ask if staff could comment on the money that's been able to, with the arrears that's been collected through this program.
So through the chair, we haven't compiled all the arrears that we have successfully collected, but anecdotally, we did review one household that had entered into a repayment agreement, and staff were successful in having almost $15,000 repaid within a 4-month period. So I can confidently say that it is a very successful program. It keeps people housed and it helps with repayment agreements. So we are reducing our revenue loss due to arrears.
Thank you. So I guess it sounds like we really couldn't put a cost on this program. I think it's important to note that through this pilot program, 178 households were supported, and that it's changing lives. The success stories speak for themselves. And I thought at the beginning that this program was a great idea, but now we can see firsthand just how important that it is. And I'm looking forward to the fact that we're extending it today, but I look forward to the future for when we can make this a permanent program. And I just wanted to actually just thank staff for the positive impact that you're making on people's lives. Thank you. And with that, I'll go back to Councillor McCreary.
Chair, thank you. Thank you for those words. So in the report, it had a number of case studies. One of the case studies was about someone who was living in what could best be described as squalor. Are we still inspecting tenant units annually?
Through the chair, absolutely. We do annual inspections, and whenever a property manager identifies a concern with a household, so this could even be when they do their monthly rent collection, or they meet with the tenant, or they receive complaints from neighbors, then they do refer that household to the HSW program in an effort to try and curb any of these problems before they impact the neighbors and the rest of the community.
And as the landlord, we obviously have control over what can be stored outside in the rear yards or front yards of these units. It alluded to a problem in one of the interior yards as well. So is that a case where we simply say to them to clean up?
Yeah, through the chair, yes, and the HSW assigned to that household would assist with everything, which includes arranging for junk removal, junk pickups, and finding economic means for that household to actually complete the work that needs to happen.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. So I'll be supporting this. It's a shame that we have to spend this money. It's a shame that the province has to flow this money to us for us to put into a reserve for crises like this. I find it shameful that probably the lion's share of these folks are older individuals who probably didn't have a lot of financial ability, and the desire of other levels of government to just pile on people and increase their costs of living is pretty darn shameful. And you see the impact on the seniors in our community. And it's, you know, most are female because females tend to outlive us. It's just, you know, there's just so many needs in our communities, and yet the other levels of government don't seem to have the same priorities as us. So maybe folks should start paying closer attention when they vote. Not just this time, but hopefully federally as soon as possible as well. Thank you.
Go ahead, Councillor Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You're doing a fine job. And maybe to Mary, in page 4 of the report, it talks about the funding. So the funding is an increase of $249,000 or almost $250,000 almost.
So through the chair, that was that increase from the Reaching Home federal grant funding. And that funding is intended specifically to use for our winter sheltering response. So that funding was used to help increase capacity in the emergency sheltering system until April 1st.
And the 1.33 million is that from the federal grant program too?
Through the chair, yes. So table 1, which is on page 4 of the report, that is our annual allocations from Reaching Home, which have been confirmed.
And that's federal funding.
Correct.
And is there provincial funding matching any of this?
No, there is no provincial funding for this program.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Sicoli.
Just got to get something off my chest, and perhaps 62% of these individuals are women, not because they live longer, but because they've been economically strangled with disproportionate wages for the last, 60 years. So just wanted to put a different perspective out there. Thank you.
All right. So with that, if there aren't any other speakers, then we're going to call the question on this item.
All those in favor? Motion is carried.
Thank you. And we're moving right along to item 5.2. And I also believe that was Councillor Miller that separated that.
I did, Madam Chair. Thank you. Just a quick question. Do we know how many units are going into that location? It just, you're asking for $300,000. To me, it seems like a lot of money, but you could almost build a unit for that. I assume the number of units going in there would be between 1 and 100. Is there any light you can share on that?
Through the chair, Clayton Pay, Manager of Housing Initiatives. Right now, what we're proposing is to maximize the lot through this planning exercise. We're looking at everything between 8 to 16 units for that size of lot. It's not a generous size. But also the funding is to look at what we would require for any variances and changes to the possible zoning, not the zoning, but setbacks and whatnot on the site to ensure we can maximize our buildable area.
Okay. Just another quick question. That 300,000, that would cover all that, the planning portion and looking at this, that would cover it all what you're requesting, just to be clear.
Through the chair, that is the plan to have that. So when we do initiate a design build contract, that that individual won't have to seek any other planning approvals.
Okay, thank you.
Counselor Slask, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Is there currently any funding to develop something on this property?
Through the chair, right now, we do not have a grant funding set aside, but what staff do is do put in applications for every stream through CMHC and the provincial government and federal government to try and secure funding. This is one of the sites we actually applied for last mile funding to the provincial government. Unfortunately, we were not successful in our application. However, staff do continue to submit applications to help offset the costs of development.
Okay. And then in the background, it indicates that it will be for a wide range of tenants, right from seniors to families to singles. We've not had a lot of luck mixing other folks with seniors, have we?
But through the chair, we have multifamily units already where there are seniors and non-seniors residing together. However, dedicated senior buildings still exist. So for this development, we would be just looking at a variety of bedrooms, so 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. And we will really look to the centralized waiting list data to determine what number of units are most in need.
Okay, it seems to me I can recall at Lorne Towers and Brant Towers that we had a lot of problems when we tried to bring in other folks other than seniors into the buildings.
Through the chair, that would have been before my time, so I can't comment on that. Those are buildings with a senior mandate, so seniors are the ones who are being moved in.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Any other speakers to this item? All right, with that, we'll call the question.
All those in favor? Motion is carried.
And now we'll move to 6.2, and I believe that was Councillor Bell who had that separated.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Firstly, staff, thank you very much for the report. I know we get it annually. I appreciate the frequency with which you get this information. I'm looking at the figure 2, which is the centralized housing wait list. And I've been on this social services committee since 2018 or early 2019. The numbers are reduced 700 in that time. I take no personal credit for that, but I do find a disconnect in data that we've got here. In that time, we have added, I think, 200 and some units, so that accounts for a degree of that change. At the same time, having listened to Ian earlier, having read the AMO report, it feels like there's a disconnect between what this graph is telling me and what I'm hearing in terms of concerns about affordability and indeed the general direction of the AMO report on homelessness that we're actually increasing. Perhaps staff could comment on that. Is this a lagging indicator rather than a leading indicator?
Through the chair, thank you for your question. I'll start off and I'll probably ask Katie Moss, the manager of housing programs, to finish. Really, what we are seeing is multifaceted approaches. So the centralized housing wait list is very specific to people who actually qualify for rent geared to income housing. So these are folks whose income levels are quite low and they only qualify for the centralized waiting list. Many people who are experiencing homelessness might not actually meet rent geared to income eligibility requirements, because people experiencing homelessness, it could be employed. They could be someone like myself, and we just had a turn of bad luck and we are unhoused. So there's a variety of factors that lead to homelessness increasing, but the centralized wait list decreasing. We're also looking at rent supplements and portable housing benefits. So when a person is on the centralized housing wait list, if they choose to accept a rent supplement or a portable housing benefit, they are removed from the centralized housing wait list. So we have been able to offset those numbers by supporting them like that.
Thank you, Mary. A follow-up question, if I may. How many of the units that we've added are defined as RGI?
So from the units that we have added, I haven't counted them, but we tried to put a mixture into every single building. So with Lucy Marco Place, our newest build, we have a mixture of rent geared to income. We have 60%, 80%, and 100% average market rent units. So I would say approximately a third would be rent geared to income units from all of the new housing that we have developed.
Yeah, that further makes me not understand this downward trend, and I just worry that we might be somehow underreporting relative to the general feel about the state of the economy and the AMO report on homelessness. A final question, if I may. I note that less than 5% of the people on the wait list are actually from the county. Does that just indicate a mobility of people that they will gravitate to where the housing is?
Through the chair, once again, I'm not quite sure why that trend is that only 5% are from the county. However, I would suggest that most people, if they are lacking housing, they're struggling with transportation, so they would move to a larger city center so that they can access public transportation, they can access services.
Thank you.
Councillor Coley, please go ahead.
Hi there. I have a question regarding the name of this program is eluding me right now, but the city has a program to which we employ private landlords to take individuals in, and then we assist them with subsidizing that rent. Can you refresh my memory on the name of that program?
Yes, through the chair, that's our rent supplement program. So any approved landlords who have units that are affordable, they can partner with the city for a rent supplement, and then they would house a household off the centralized waiting list.
So that was my next question. Those individuals would draw from the centralized waiting list. And how many landlords do we currently have enrolled in that program? I know I'm catching you off guard, but.
Through the chair, we would have to get back to you with that.
Okay, I'd be interested to know that information and to see if there's any way that we can leverage that program. I truly believe that we as municipalities have the opportunity to partner with private entities to help, ease the burden that we're facing. And I think we have an opportunity here. I think the problem, I might be veering a little bit off track with this, but I do think it's worth discussing, and it might be worth looking into, and it might be worth say partnering with, perhaps the real estate association, the local real estate association can perhaps, have some outreach there to landlords and investors and see if this is a program that they might want to partner with the city in. So I'll leave that with you, Mary. I know you do really well with that, but there might be some opportunity there with that. Thank you.
Councillor Slass, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Through you to Mary. Mary, it appears the non-senior applicants with no dependents have the longest wait, 8 to 12 years for housing. Seeing that they're single folks, individuals, have we looked at tiny home developments? They're popping up across the country, and we're not doing any of that. And I just wondered if that's something that we're looking at to be able to properly house single individuals.
So through the chair, tiny homes, we do have modular home builds, which is slightly larger than the tiny homes that are in the news. So if we're looking at 18 Sturton and 177 Colburn Street West, those are the modular housing builds. Those studio units are quite small to begin with. The actual tiny homes or micro shelters, we're not looking at those because they're not actual housing units. Most of them only come with a bed and a desk and a chair. So there's no washroom facilities, and we would having to look at building in that infrastructure. So no, at this time, we're not looking at tiny homes.
Okay, thank you.
Any further first-time speakers to this item? Okay. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and just make a comment. So we've talked about a lot of the trends and about how we could be doing more, but I also wanted just to point out that in 2024, we've actually housed 212 households, and I wanted to thank staff just for the incredible work that you're doing to making a reality of those folks having a place to call home a reality. So thank you for that. Councillor Oakley, go ahead.
Through you, Madam Chair, I just want to jump in quickly just to make a comment, sort of based off of what Councilor Bell was talking about in regards to the trends where we see the current residency being 5% county or Brant residents. I just want to flag that for anyone who is watching this, that I think, while the data is appreciated, I think defining folks as whether or not they're from the county, from the city, or from outside the area, you don't need a passport to go from the county of Brant to the city of Brantford or to Hamilton or to Norfolk. I think it does get a little nebulous, and I think it really demonstrates why this should be handled at the provincial level, because, at the end of the day, folks in Ontario, folks in our region need housing, and it's up to us to provide it, and we shouldn't look at this as County of Brant's paying 28%, whatever our current service agreement says. We're not getting ripped off because this says 5% here. Many of the folks who are currently living in the city used to live in the county, moved there, as Councilor Sicoli said, because they've moved to the larger city. So I just wanted to highlight that there, that no, we're not getting ripped off in the county of Brant. We are fighting this issue together with our partners here in the city of Brantford.
Thank you. Any further speakers to this item before I call the question? We'll call the question then.
All those in favor? Motion is carried.